Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, where we provide tailor-made solutions for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies by improving their quality of life, and where we also provide tailor-made solutions for hospitals and intensive care units to save money and resources whilst providing quality care. In last week's blog, I answered another question from one of our readers, where the reader asked, "My husband has been in ICU since January 2020 with pneumonia and a stroke. He's got a tracheostomy and he can't come off the ventilator. We are stuck. Can we go home with intensive care at home?" You can check out last week's blog by clicking on the link below this video in the written version of this blog. In this week's blog, I want to talk about how to get evidence-based care and treatment at home for long-term ventilated patients with tracheostomy and other medically complex patients. All of our clients here at Intensive Care at Home, without exception, would either have been in ICU or in pediatric ICU in a hospital for extended periods because of their ventilation, tracheostomy needs, or otherwise medical complex needs. Therefore, we also look after some clients at home that are not ventilated but still have spent extended and prolonged periods in intensive care or pediatric intensive care for significant medical complexities that warrants for them to have a team of ICU or pediatric ICU nurses 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year at home. They often have neurological conditions with seizures that require unstable airway management at times as well. Unstable airway management is a skill that only critical care trained doctors or nurses have. They need to have the specialist training in ICU, pediatric ICU, or in the emergency department. In order to improve our clients and their families' quality of life, or sometimes quality of end of life, quickly, the only way is to get them out of intensive care back home with the same level of skill and expertise than they can get in ICU or pediatric ICU. In essence, Intensive Care at Home provides an evidence-based intensive care substitution service with the primary goal to improve our clients and their families' quality of life. By doing so, it also achieves many other goals that our other stakeholders want to achieve as well. For example, number one, it frees up in-demand and highly sought-after ICU and pediatric ICU beds. Number two, it frees up in-demand ICU or pediatric ICU staff to look after other critically ill patients in ICU or pediatric ICU. Number three, it reduces the cost of the most expensive hospital bed, which is the intensive care bed, approximately by 50%. The $5,000 to $6,000 per bed day ICU or pediatric ICU bed now only costs half by sending ICU and pediatric ICU nurses into the home here at Intensive Care at Home. Number four, it gives long-term ICU and pediatric ICU patients and their families choice and obviously quality of life at home. In order to provide such highly specialized ICU and pediatric ICU care at home, we have developed and created a third-party accredited through ISO 9001-2015 as well as the NDIS quality system that enables us to deliver a high-quality intensive care nursing service in the home. The quality manual is not only third-party certified and accredited, it is also evidence-based. So what do I mean by that? For example, whilst intensive care at home is a relatively new concept in Australia, we still have not reinvented the wheel. Since the late 1990s and the early 2000s, long-term intensive care patients have been going home in Germany on a regular basis. Current estimations are suggesting that approximately 25,000 patients are at home on life support with ventilation and tracheostomy in Germany, keeping ICU and pediatric ICU beds empty for more acutely unwell patients needing critical care. And to this day, Germany is still the leading country in the world when it comes to intensive care at home services. A lot of thought and research has gone into the model of safe service delivery. It is therefore no surprise that the only way services can be safely delivered at home for long-term ICU or pediatric ICU patients is with ICU or pediatric ICU nurses with a minimum of 2 years ICU experience, ideally with a postgraduate critical care qualification. This is documented and evidenced by the Mechanical Home Ventilation Guidelines. The Mechanical Home Ventilation Guidelines is a result of over 20 years intensive care at home services in Germany. We have published the Mechanical Home Ventilation Guidelines on our website, and we follow those principles. So we therefore rigorously apply those high quality standards to our own service, enabling us to deal with ICU and pediatric ICU directly as a genuine alternative to a long-term stay in ICU and pediatric ICU. Given that intensive care at home is still a reasonably new but rapidly growing care model in Australia, it's very important to establish and maintain high quality care standards, just like intensive care in a hospital does. Good processes, good leadership, good policies and procedures, and great ICU and pediatric ICU nurses are needed to establish and maintain those high quality standards. This is similar to intensive care and pediatric intensive care in a hospital, where staff need to go through training, bedside exposure, mentoring, etc. to look after some of the most vulnerable patients in a hospital that are critically ill and life support dependent. There is no room for shortcuts. It's the same in the community. There is no room for shortcuts either. Whenever patients are long-term ventilated with tracheostomies or are medically complex, where they are at risk of spending time in ICU or pediatric ICU, the only way to safely manage those patients at home is with evidence-based care. It therefore absolutely boggles my mind that there are some organizations that are offering to look after ventilated and tracheostomized patients at home with disability support workers or general RNs that are not ICU trained. I have an excerpt here from a job that is looking to employ disability support workers to look after basically intensive care patients. So I'll read this out for you. We are currently seeking casual support workers to work at X company. We are seeking candidates with the following qualities: respect, empathy, passion, integrity, and to be a team player. The successful candidate will be specifically trained to work within this role via online modules and hands-on learning. Duties: ventilator and tracheostomy care, bowel therapy, medications, patient handling, clinical notes, skills and experience, certificate 3 or 4 in disability, individual support or aged care. Alternatively, someone with support work experience history, mandatory first aid certificate, CPR certificate, national police check. So this is the ad. Have you ever wondered what it would be like getting on an airplane and the baggage handler would fly the plane instead of the pilot? This is exactly what's happening in this situation with the job ad. It's the baggage handler that's flying the airplane, so to speak. Imagine if intensive care units would start looking for disability support workers to look after their patients on life support that are critically ill. The general public would go up in arms, and rightly so. If you look at the job ad more closely, it suggests that learning about ventilation and tracheostomy, which is a skill that takes years of training and practical exposure in ICU and pediatric ICU, can be learned online in a quick session. The job ad also suggests that a disability support worker can handle clinical notes. Once again, managing and documenting clinical notes for ventilated and tracheostomized patients takes years of training as a critical care registered nurse in intensive care. The above job ad makes any intensive care professional shiver and cringe. It probably also makes any family member that has lost a loved one at home on a ventilator because of disability support workers providing inadequate care to an intensive care patient brings tears to my eyes. Having disability support workers or non-ICU trained registered nurses looking after long-term ICU or pediatric ICU patients at home is not evidence-based. Otherwise, there would be reference to it from those organizations. Intensive care at home is not blind to what is happening in the community with some ventilated patients with tracheostomy. We are well aware that some of those patients are being looked after by disability support workers or non-ICU trained RNs that have literally absolutely no clue in what they're doing, and it's dangerous. It's again what I mentioned before. It's the baggage handler flying the airplane instead of the pilot. Having disability support workers or non-ICU trained general registered nurses looking after ventilated and long-term ICU or pediatric ICU patients at home is not only dangerous, I believe it's a criminal act. Just like it would be a criminal act if the baggage handler was to fly the airplane instead of the pilot. Also, a long-term ventilated or medically complex patient has a medical condition first and foremost, and the disability is a result of the medical condition and not the other way round. Therefore, a disability support worker can only ever be a complement to support a critical care trained or ICU nurse on a 24/7 roster to enable the intensive care substitution service in the home. Again, just like in intensive care in a hospital, you wouldn't just pick random people to look after medically complex patients that are life support dependent and or medically complex. We at Intensive Care at Home, we are determined to bring high quality standards into the community that gives long-term ICU and pediatric ICU patients the option to leave intensive care and go home with the care they need, deserve, and that is evidence-based. Anything else is just simply dangerous and just a short-term money-making scheme for business people that have no morals or ethics, and it puts some of the most vulnerable people in our society and their families at risk. Thank you for watching this video. If you have a loved one in intensive care with long-term ventilation and tracheostomy needs or any other medical complexities, you should also contact us on one of the numbers on the top of our website, or just simply reach out to me via email to patrick@intensivecareathome.com. That's Patrick just with a K at the end. And if you are an intensive care nurse or a pediatric intensive care nurse and you're looking to get out of the craziness of an intensive care unit and work for us in a much nicer and more holistic and client-centric family environment, you should contact us as well, and you should check out our career section on our website. We're also currently hiring a social worker. We currently have vacancies for experienced ICU and experienced pediatric ICU nurses in Melbourne, on the Mornington Peninsula, in the northern suburbs in Melbourne, and also in Sunbury. So really all across the Melbourne metropolitan area, but also in Warragul and Trafalgar in Gippsland. And if you want to work for us, you can escape the hustle and the bustle of intensive care and work in a much nicer and much more family and client-friendly and holistic environment. You can also have a look at our service section, where we detail exactly how we deliver services, or tailor-made services, I should say, for our patients and their families, but also for hospitals and intensive care units. We have also been part of the Royal Melbourne Health Accelerator program in the past for innovative healthcare companies. Thank you so much for watching this video. This is Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, and I'll talk to you in a few days.